Portuguese people are being asked to support one of the harshest budgets in living memory. The budget due to be approved next week by the Parliament.
During the 2010 eurozone crisis, the world watched as the so-called PIIGS economies collapsed. Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain, all teetering on the edge of financial ruin. Portugal got hit incredibly hard, requiring a massive €78 billion bailout. But here's what most people miss about this story. The structural flaws that caused Portugal's debt crisis were geographic, not just financial. To truly understand what happened to Portugal, you have to look at a map. Let's start with a fact that surprises most people. Portugal was already struggling long before the 2008 financial crisis even began. While Ireland was riding a property boom and Spain was pouring concrete at record speed, Portugal was stagnating. The entire decade of the 2000s became essentially a lost decade. Two separate recessions hammered the country, one in 2002 to 2003 and another in 2008 to 2009. By April 2007, The Economist had already labeled Portugal the new sick man of Europe. The global financial crisis didn't create Portugal's problems, it simply exposed them. So what went wrong? This is where geography crippled the Portuguese economy in ways that became impossible to ignore. Portugal sits at the far southwestern edge of Europe. You can't get much further from the economic heartland of Germany, France, and the Benelux countries while still being on the continent. This isn't just a trivia fact, it's an economic reality that affects everything from shipping costs to market access. When your nearest major trading partners are hundreds of kilometers away and your domestic market is only about 10 million people, you face structural disadvantages that countries like the Netherlands or Belgium simply don't. For centuries, Portugal compensated for this peripheral position through its maritime empire and Atlantic trade networks. Its economy was oriented outward, toward Brazil, Africa, and Asia, not inward toward continental Europe. But when Portugal joined the European Economic Community in 1986, and later adopted the euro in 1999, it was making a bet that deeper integration with Europe would overcome the disadvantages of geography. That bet didn't pay off. Here's why. When Portugal adopted the euro, it surrendered one of the most powerful tools a peripheral economy can have, the ability to devalue its currency. Before the euro, if Portuguese goods became too expensive relative to German or French products, Portugal could weaken the escudo, making its exports cheaper and more competitive. After 1999, that option vanished overnight. The real exchange rate appreciated, and Portuguese exporters found themselves competing on an uneven playing field with no way to adjust. Then came two devastating blows that showed exactly how geography crippled the Portuguese economy in the new millennium. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. In 2004, the European Union expanded eastward, absorbing countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary. Both events proved catastrophic for Portugal's traditional industries. Textiles, footwear, and low to mid-value manufacturing had formed the backbone of Portuguese exports. Suddenly, China could produce these goods for a fraction of the cost, while Eastern European nations offered similar labor at lower wages, but with the added advantage of being geographically closer to Europe's core markets. Portugal was getting squeezed from both sides, and it had no currency lever to pull. The numbers tell the rest of the story. By 2009, Portugal's budget deficit had ballooned to nearly 10% of GDP. By 2010, it hit a staggering 11.2%. Government debt surged from 68% of GDP in 2007 to 111% by 2011. Bond yields spiked above 10% by mid-2011, making it essentially impossible for Portugal to borrow on open markets. In December 2009, Standard & Poor's had already downgraded Portugal's outlook to negative. Fitch followed with a series of downgrades starting in March 2010. The political situation collapsed alongside the finances. In March 2011, Prime Minister José Sócrates resigned after losing a no-confidence vote over his proposed spending cuts. Then, on April 6, 2011, Sócrates went on national television and announced that Portugal, facing bankruptcy, would formally request financial assistance from the IMF and the European Financial Stability Facility. On May 16, eurozone leaders approved a €78 billion bailout package, making Portugal the third eurozone country after Greece and Ireland to receive emergency funds. What followed was brutal. The so-called Troika, the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the IMF imposed an adjustment program in exchange for the loans. Public servants saw average wage cuts of 20%. Those earning more than 1,500 euros per month got cut by 25%. Health, education, and welfare spending were slashed. Taxes went up. Bank holidays were eliminated. The new center-right government under Pedro Passos Coelho implemented these measures with little room for negotiation. The human cost was staggering. Unemployment climbed to between 16 and 17% by 2013. Among young people aged 15 to 24, it reached nearly 40%, and that's when the exodus began. Between 2011 and 2014, more people left Portugal than entered for the first time in recent history. Nearly 573,000 people emigrated during this period. As of 2024, roughly 2.3 million Portuguese nationals live abroad, including 30% of those aged 15 to 39. That represents an extraordinary brain drain for a country of 10 million. There's even a controversial argument that the bailout itself may not have been entirely necessary. Political scientist Robert Fishman wrote in the New York Times that Portugal fell victim to waves of speculation from bond traders and rating agencies. He pointed out that in the first quarter of 2010, before the market pressure intensified, Portugal actually had one of the best rates of economic recovery in the EU. Even the media label PIIGS may have made things worse. Research published in the European Journal of Political Research found evidence that the widespread use of the acronym correlated with increases in those nations' bond yields. The label itself became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Eventually, Portugal did claw its way back. The country exited the bailout program in May 2014. By 2016, the budget deficit had fallen to 2.1% of GDP, the lowest since Portugal became a democracy in 1974. In 2017, the economy grew 2.7%, its strongest performance since 2000. By 2024, Portugal was running a budget surplus and had reduced its sovereign debt to 95% of GDP, a 14-year low. In 2025, debt continued falling below 90%. But the scars remain. Portugal's labor productivity ranks fourth lowest among all 27 EU member states. Wages are still significantly lower than in Western European peers. The structural challenges that geography imposed haven't disappeared. The country is still peripheral. The domestic market is still small. And the educated young people who left during the crisis years, many of them never came back. The story of Portugal's debt crisis gets told as a story about government spending and fiscal irresponsibility. And those elements are real, but that narrative is incomplete. How geography crippled the Portuguese economy is the deeper structural story. The story of a small nation on Europe's edge that gave up its currency flexibility, watched its traditional industries get undercut by China and Eastern Europe, and found itself trapped in a monetary union designed for economies that look nothing like its own. As former Secretary of State Rogério Fernandes Ferreira put it, Portugal is no longer a peripheral country. That's a hopeful statement, but geography doesn't change. The question is whether Portugal can finally build an economy that overcomes the map it was drawn on.